Azami Ozu wasn't born a villain. No, she started her life much like anyone else, but then life happened, and when life happens, it either leaves you kinder or crueler. In Azami's case, it left her colder, harder, and sharper, like the tip of a blade that cuts with precision, all the while pretending it's just a tool. She came from Kawabe province on Kamigawa, where the rain drips slowly and patiently from the rooftops, as if time itself is waiting for something. Her father, a man built from duty, was a soldier. He was the kind of man who polished his armor even when it didn't need polishing, who left before dawn and came home after the stars had already made their bed in the sky. Her mother, on the other hand, was far more elusive. She spent her days lost in Soratami lore, studying the stories of creatures that seemed more fantasy than reality. Between the two of them, there was little left for Azami and her brother. They were like ghosts in their own home, unseen and unheard. Azami found solace in the only place that would take her seriously, her mother's magical texts. These were not books for children, not books that one should touch with careless hands or read with a wandering mind. But Azami wasn't careless. She wasn't wandering. She was deliberate. She took the texts and read them by the river, where the water ran soft and slow, whispering secrets. Her mother had told her not to touch those books, not to open their pages, so of course she did. And then, like all things that can't be explained, something happened. A river spirit, something more ethereal than human eyes could comprehend, visited her. To Azami, it was a kami, a great and powerful deity, one that held the answers to the universe in its watery hands. The spirit spoke to her, not in words, but in thoughts and feelings, and Azami made a decision in that moment. She would give everything for knowledge. The spirit's promise was like the sharp glint of a blade, and Azami's soul leaned in close. A year passed, and Azami's life became more about the pursuit of what lay beyond the visible world, beyond the trivial matters of people and places. One day, as she sat by the river, her mother, realizing her daughter was missing, searched for her, but in the process, her mother stumbled, slipped, and fell into the river. It was a moment Azami would not forget, but for all the wrong reasons. As her mother struggled in the water, gasping for air, Azami watched. She believed with a cold certainty that her own future was too important to concern herself with something as mundane as saving a life. Her mother survived that day, but barely. Azami? She didn't mourn, didn't cry, didn't feel the ache in her chest that a daughter should. She simply continued reading, as though the river had taken a part of her, along with her mother's almost drowning. A month later, her mother was dead. Her father, broken by both grief and the weight of his own obligations, did what men like him always do. He sent Azami away. He packed up his late wife's library and sent both the books and the daughter to the Minamo school, as if hoping the two might make sense of each other. At Minamo, Azami's world became one of books and scrolls, of ink-stained fingers and eyes that no longer saw people, but problems to be solved. It was there she met Etsumi Urano, another student. Etsumi, unlike Azami, hadn't been hollowed out by the world. She was alive in a way that Azami no longer knew how to be. The two became friends, or at least something resembling friendship. But Azami's love, her only true love, was for knowledge, and in the end it would always come first. The proof of that came during a fateful trip to Kitanosu Temple. Azami had convinced Etsumi to accompany her into Nezumi territory. They were looking for scrolls, ancient hidden scrolls that held the kind of knowledge people died for. The Nezumi attacked them, claws and teeth flashing in the dim light. In that moment, as Etsumi cried out for help, Azami was forced to choose, the scrolls or her friend. She didn't hesitate. She left Etsumi behind, let the Nezumi take her, while Azami clutched the scrolls to her chest like they were her lifeline. Because to her, they were. Time passed, as it always does, and Azami's influence at Minamo grew. She became the head librarian, the keeper of the greatest library in Kamigawa. She ruled it with a cold efficiency that unnerved even her colleagues. One of them, Atsuko Shimazaki, grew jealous, envious of the power Azami held so effortlessly. Atsuko wanted what Azami had, and so she challenged her. Not in the open, of course, that's not how things worked at Minamo. Instead, it was under the guise of friendship. Atsuko invited Azami on a picnic, a chance to make peace. But there was no peace in Atsuko's heart. The mushrooms she served were poisoned. Azami ate just enough to make herself ill, but not enough to kill her. She watched, perhaps with curiosity, perhaps with amusement, as Atsuko slowly succumbed to the poison. It was a long death, painful, drawn out, and when it was over, Azami didn't weep. She didn't mourn. It was simply another moment, another step on her path to something greater. Everyone else believed Atsuko's death had been an accident, but Azami knew better, and she didn't care. Then came the Kami War, and with it the return of the river spirit from her childhood. Hunters brought it to her, bound and broken. Azami studied the creature, dissected it in her mind, and came to a bitter realization: the spirit was nothing. It had no great power. It wasn't a deity, not even close. All the deaths, all the pain, all the choices she had made, they were hers. She had been the architect of her own destiny, and the Kami had been nothing more than an illusion. The weight of that truth pressed down on her, but Azami, as always, didn't mourn. She couldn't. She didn't know how. In the end, Azami became more than just a librarian. She became a puppeteer, pulling strings, manipulating students into learning forbidden knowledge. She watched as their minds unraveled, driven mad by the things they discovered. It didn't bother her. Madness, after all, was just another path to knowledge. As for her fate, well, that remains a mystery. When Hidetsugu attacked the Minamo school, it's unclear whether Azami survived. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But if there's one thing we know for sure, it's that people like Azami never truly die. Their stories, their legacies, they live on, whispered in the shadows, carried by the wind, and perhaps that's all she ever wanted.